Welcome back to my series where we are creating an automated build system with Docker and Jenkins in Azure. In part 1, we set up a Linux VM in Azure, installed Docker on that VM, and set up secure communication to the Docker host. In part 2, we used a custom Jenkins Docker image to stand up our Jenkins master and created a simple sample build job that spins up an ephemeral Docker container slave node. Since our ultimate goal is to allow developers to create their own Docker images for their build environments, we need a good way for them to insert them into the system. So in this installment, we are going to stand up a private Docker registry in Azure and secure it with a TLS certificate from letsencrypt. So let's get rolling. The first thing we will need to do is open two ports in Azure to our VM. Port 443 for HTTPS communication to Jenkins, and port 5000 for HTTPS communication to our Docker registry. We can do this in the Azure portal like we did in part 1. So in the portal, we'll click on our resource group, our network security group, inbound security rules, add. First we'll do allow HTTPS. We can select this from the service dropdown. Click OK. That is updating. We'll also add allow Docker registry. Port 5000. Click OK. Alternatively, we can use the Azure Command Line Interface, or CLI, from a Docker container like we did in part 1.5. If you want to learn how to run the Azure CLI in a Docker container, check out video 1.5 or the blog post that goes with it. Alright, we're going to flip over the terminal window. And run the command to create the inbound security rule for Docker registry. Alright, that completed successfully. Let's execute the command to create the allow HTTPS rule. And that completed successfully as well. While we are modifying our Azure setup, we also need to add a Blob storage account because we're going to configure our Docker registry to store images in Blob storage. It's pretty cool, huh? Let's get that out of the way as well. So back in our resource group, let's click on Add. We can search for storage. Click Create. I'm going to name this Docker Build Registry. This is Blob storage. Standard performance is fine. Locally redundant is fine. We don't need this across geographical regions. Maybe you do in your situation. We don't for this demo. We need hot access here. We need to be able to get these images right away. No encryption. Correct subscription. Correct resource group. Correct location. Click Create. Or I can cancel out of here and we can do this with the CLI. So back in terminal, and execute the command to create a storage account. You can see the same general settings here. In the resource group, blob storage, locally redundant, hot access tier, and the name Docker Build Registry. While that's doing its thing, I thought I'd let you know that the scripts I used in video and tutorial 1.75 will be updated with these new pieces as well. So here in my GitHub repository, I will update these scripts to create these two new inbound security rules and the storage account as well. I really want this infrastructure to be set up as code so I can recreate the Jenkins environment very easily. The storage account was created. In part 2, we cloned my Jenkins Docker GitHub repo to our VM. The repo includes a Dockerfile definition for a letsencrypt container as well. That's right, we're going to run letsencrypt in the Docker container on our VM to obtain our TLS certificates. In order to do that, we need to stop our running containers. Remember that we have a data container so that all of our Jenkins settings, including our cloud setup, Docker templates, and build jobs will persist. Okay, let's SSH into our VM. Go into our Jenkins Docker folder and issue the Docker compose to stop our project. All right, now we can get legit with our real trusted TLS certificates from Let's Encrypt. Go to the Let's Encrypt folder, and let's build the Let's Encrypt image. And now we need to make a directory for Let's Encrypt to put the certificates it generates into on the host. Now we will run the Let's Encrypt container and let it do its thing. Notice here we mapped the Let's Encrypt on the host, the Let's Encrypt folder on the host to the Let's Encrypt folder on the container. We also map port 80 to port 80 and port 443 to port 443. So now we're attached to that container. Now we're going to issue the Let's Encrypt command to create our certificates for our dockerbuild.harebrainedapps.com. Remember back in part 1, I insisted you use your own personal custom domain names. You won't be able to complete this if you're using a domain that ends in azure.com or cloudapp.com, since you do not own those root domains. Your email address, agree to the terms of service. And success. Let's Encrypt has put our certificates into the file system. Now we need to do one more for our Docker Registry domain name. All right, and this succeeded as well. And as we can see, the success messages tell us that Let's Encrypt puts the files we need into the Let's Encrypt folder live and then the domain name. So we should have 2 of those. Now we need to tell Nginx where to find fullchain.pem and privekey.pem for both of our domain servers. So first let's edit registry.conf. All right, in this file I have placeholders for your domain name. And this is for a Docker registry. And these can be on separate lines. All right. So we're telling Nginx where to find our 2 files we need for SSL certificates, the full chain PEM and privekey.pem. Save that. Now let's edit our Jenkins configuration file. We have a little bit more work to do here since we were already running this non-SSL. We're going to change listen to 443. We're going to add a server name here, and Docker build is our Jenkins server name. And we'll add our SSL configuration, SSL on. And location of our 2 PEM files for our Jenkins configuration. Exit out here and save our changes. All right, so now we also need to add basic authentication credentials. One of the reasons we're using SSL, and we have to use SSL or TLS, is because we're using basic authentication. That's the way Docker Registry recommends to do things, so that's what we're going to do. We need to install Apache utils in order to create a basic auth key file here. Looks like I'd already done that. Let's make a directory to hold those. And we'll issue the command htpassword with our user Docker user. And we'll create this password. And we should have a file here. Registry.password. You can add other users to the password as needed. We're going to leave it at this for now. We need to modify the Nginx Docker file so that it also copies the new registry.conf and the registry.password file we just created into the container. We also need to expose port 443 for SSL communication. Save those changes. And finally, we need to edit the Docker compose file to tell it about the registry. Internally, the registry is going to run at 5,000. And here we also tell the configuration to use Azure as our storage for the images. So we have to get the account key from Azure. So let's go back here. Let's refresh this. We have Docker build registry here. In access keys, we can copy key 1 from here. As you might imagine, we can also do this through the command line. So let's start up a new terminal window here. And let's do this real quick from the command line. And we can get the key from here. And we're going to call this container registry. We also need to put a link to the registry container into the Nginx container. And I think that is it. Now let's restart our Jenkins Docker deployment. All right, we rebuilt our Nginx and restarted the system. So you can see our Nginx container running, a registry container running, our Jenkins master running. Our Jenkins data was still there, it exited, but that's perfectly fine, it just holds our data. Now let's test our registry out over HTTPS from the command line here. So we're going to try to curl to it. And we get a 200 response, and the response from that particular request right here is correct. So we're able to communicate over TLS to our Docker registry. Let's see if we can also get to Jenkins over HTTPS as well. Make sure our configuration is correct. And we can. There is one change we should make in here that sometimes causes some problems when you switch from HTTP to HTTPS in Jenkins. I'm going to manage Jenkins. Configure system. And we'll change the Jenkins URL to default to HTTPS. And save that. All right, let's see if we can push an image to our new secure registry as well. That's what we have here. So we do have Jenkins slave here. So let's tag this to go to our registry. So now this is tagged correctly. Let's log into our registry. And let's push this to the Docker registry. Now if we flip over to our registry storage account, in our registry container, we will see that we now have a Jenkins slave repository. And these layers are actually being saved here as files. All right, that push is completed successfully. Let's remove the local copy of our Jenkins slave image. So there's no Docker slave image here. Now let's pull that back from our registry. So we've successfully pulled our Jenkins slave image from our private registry over TLS in a secure manner. This is pretty cool stuff. Now we have a registry where we can put images that we can use for our build or even for production deployments if we want to. In this tutorial, we created a secure Docker registry and also secured our Jenkins installation with TLS certificates from letsencrypt. Now we have all the major pieces of our build system in place. In the next installment, we will talk about custom scripts in Jenkins and exposing those scripts in an API-like fashion so we can control Jenkins and create build jobs on the fly when we need to. Thanks and see you next time.